Welcome to Beyond Green, how permaculture can deepen sustainability practices. We appreciate you joining us today. My name is David Hall. I'll serve as the moderator. And very briefly, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Kjell van Zoen, the co-founder and CEO of Plywerk. So give a wave, Kjell. All right, excellent. And then Sarah Curtis-Fawley of Pacific Pie Company, and she's also the founder of Pacific Pie Company. And then we have, thank you. And Karen Wolfgang, the founder of Independence Gardens. Karen. And Jon Blumenauer, CEO of the Joinery. So, all right. And then there's you, and we weren't sure exactly who would be attracted to a session by this title with this word permaculture in it in particular. And so we want to just quickly get a brief poll on who's here. So the first question I have for you is what sector you're from, all right? And if you hear the sector that you're from, I'd like to see your best princess wave, okay? So we can get a sense of who's here. First of all, business. If you identify with you're here with a business, all right? So business sector, great. And then government. If you work with a governmental agency, okay, fantastic. If you're in academia, okay. And then also, what am I missing? Nonprofit world. All right, fantastic. So next question is, curious what your organizational size is. And on this one, if you hear your organizational size, I want to see a fist pump, all right? So give a fist pump if your organizational size is 1 to 10. Okay? 10 to 25. All right? 25 to 100. All right? And then over 100. All right, so that gives us a good sense. We actually expected a little bit different in the profile. Last question is, we're curious about your familiarity with permaculture. So if you've really basically never heard of permaculture before and you just like decided, well, I need to go to some session, so go to the one that's in the Oregon Ballroom. So you're basically hearing about permaculture for the very first time today. I'd like you to stand and take a bow. Okay, so we do have some basic familiarity. So then how many people would say that you're familiar with permaculture and you've maybe kind of informally looked into it a little bit, or you have a neighbor or something like that you've had a chance to talk to? So just some basic familiarity with permaculture. Go ahead and stand and take a bow. Okay, so that a lot of basic familiarity. And then what about being more like a, I don't know about expert, but more experienced? So you maybe have a permaculture design certification already and you're pretty familiar with it. Please stand and take a bow. Okay, so good to know that we have some background and familiarity. Some of this might be pretty basic for you if you're a little more advanced, but maybe you can help lead some of the conversations in your small groups. So thank you for being here. And just really quickly, our agenda and our workshop goals today. So we're going to give a very brief overview and introduction to permaculture. We're going to then have some small group time to explore some of the concepts, and then we'll give you an opportunity to report back what you explored. And then we'll hear from the panel, each one of the panelists with varying degrees of experience in permaculture. They're going to speak to how it's related to them and their business. And then we'll go back to the small groups and give you an opportunity to explore a little bit more and hear back from you. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end and offer some closing thoughts. So along the way, our goals are to introduce you to permaculture. Some of you don't necessarily need that. And then to play with some of the core concepts and really explore its potential relevance to business. And then hear from some business leaders with varying experience. And to really, again, converse and think about whether or not there's opportunities and some of the challenges and some of the disconnects we might find between business models and permaculture. Right. So I'm going to give the brief intro to permaculture. So what is permaculture? Well, big question, not a lot of agreement on a succinct definition. And there's a 72-hour permaculture design certification course you can take that goes into this. So we're just going to scratch the surface. But we can trace the origins of the term permaculture and many of the practices back to two men, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and they have two books in which they lay out their ideas in a little more detail. And just to give you a sense of where their mentality was at in coming up and working with these ideas and developing permaculture, this quote from Bill Mollison: "Sitting at our back doorsteps, all we need to live a good life lies about us. Sun, wind, people, buildings, stones, sea, birds, and plants surround us. Cooperation with all these things brings harmony. Opposition to them brings disaster and chaos." All right, so they're suggesting that there's maybe like a better way, and it's actually kind of simple. It's right here before us. We just have to figure out how to work with it. Now, these leaders of permaculture and many of the people that have followed them are quick to point out that many of the ideas have been borrowed from indigenous cultures. Mollison and Holmgren were in Australia, so the Aboriginal peoples of Australia were particularly influential of their ideas. And as permaculture has grown to a more global movement, indigenous cultures from around the world have continued to influence much of the thinking. So the word itself, permaculture, what does that mean? It started off as being an abbreviation or short for permanent agriculture, but pretty quickly the people involved in the movement realized that even to have like enduring agricultural systems, we need to have enduring and strong social systems to support that agricultural effort. And since then, it's really evolved to more mean permanent culture. And so the exploration now is beyond just the garden, beyond farmlands, to thinking about social permaculture and how permaculture can really contribute to creating, quote unquote, permanent culture. So to offer a succinct definition, we can say that permaculture is a set of core ethics, design principles, and techniques for creating permanent culture. And so that's what we're going to explore largely is some of the basics of these core ethics, design principles, and techniques. So what you'll find at your table are some materials. I'm not going to talk a lot about each of these slides because you have them in front of you, and the idea is to give you a chance to explore them and talk about them at your tables. One is the core ethics, and you'll see here care of earth, care of people, and fair share. Now this was developed before the triple bottom line, but you can see a real clear parallel there, but perhaps some differences by framing them as ethics and also some of the language and the thinking that is used when we say things like fair share as opposed to profit. All right, so that's one thing you'll find at your tables, and then along with that, and extending from the core ethics, you have the 12 basic design principles. So you see you'll have a handout at your table that looks a little more like this. You also have a handout at your table that talks about zones, which is about positioning elements for most efficient use of energy. Right? And then there's another handout about sectors, and sectors are about orienting yourself to the larger context that you find yourself in and the energy flows that are available. And then the last handout you'll find is on guilds. And there includes a picture here of the famous three sisters of corn, beans, and squash. And this guilds are about creating symbiotic relationships between elements. So with those materials at your tables, what we'd like to do is give you 10 minutes or so in your small groups to explore those handouts and to have a conversation among yourselves about whether or not you see opportunities of applying some of these ideas to your organization. And our panelists will circulate, so feel free to call anybody over and get some feedback or pose any questions that you might have. Okay? So we'll give you 10 minutes. All right, well, thanks, and I know for some of you that might have been your very first engagement with some of these ideas, so I'm really encouraged by a lot of the conversations that I overheard, and would like to take a minute, actually we'll give it 4 or 5 minutes, to go around and hear from, not necessarily all the tables, but several of the tables, just a quick report back and maybe some of the highlights in your conversation. So any table willing to start us off? Well, here's a table. We have a volunteer. Somebody willing to report back for the group? All right, excellent. Here, let me give you the mic.
So we were talking about
Wait.
the zones. I'll hold it for you. Don't.
The video guy is going to be mad at us if we...
Please.
But the zones, the most efficient use of energy, either personally or within a household, you want your most labor-intensive items to be the closest to you, because those are what you do the most. So it makes sense to have them close into you, and the things that are less intensive or less needed be further out. The real estate that's closest to you, it tends to be the most valuable and the most used. You go to it easier, quicker, and faster, where if it gets farther out, well, you have to go further to get it. It takes more energy to accomplish. So the zones of energy really make sense to at least me and Kathleen.
Great. So we have zones then kind of resonating, and again, that core idea is about efficient use of energy, and you want to place things that you're going to be interacting with most frequently as close to your home base as you can. Thank you. So is there another group that we can get a quick 1-minute summary from? Some highlights. Here's another table. Do we have anybody that would be willing to just give a brief summary of some of the highlights from your conversation? Great. Thank you.
Don't give me the microwave. I might start singing. I might sing. Okay. Well, our table had a lot of really great feedback. Our table had a lot of great feedback, as I'm sure yours all did. So we talked a lot about how it's the simple internal motivation pieces that you have to have every day. And so your actions can affect a larger picture and affect the structure, and that we have to flatten our hierarchy and have everyone at the table working their individual pieces to make a larger impact. So you gardening yourself at your desk will impact someone else in a different building. That's my quick summary.
Nice, kind of that highlight of the interconnectedness and the fact that our actions have effects regardless of what we're doing and where we are. Great, so one more table then. Wonderful.
Hi. So I'm with the state and he's with the feds. So we started thinking about this from the public sector perspective, and actually came to it from sort of 3 different perspectives. The first that all of us could relate to, which was, how do we apply these principles in the operations of our organization? You know, where do we locate our buildings? Do the windows open to take advantage of fresh air? Are they facing the right direction for solar gain, et cetera? That's something everyone can do. And then we started looking at this more deeply, and it's like, wow, this stuff about the guilds and how organizations support each other relates to how we do our job, how we work with our partners, how we find allies, and how we listen and gain support. And then finally we thought about what it is we're actually trying to accomplish, and whether or not these 12 design principles, we should be reprogramming our efforts to try to achieve these as objectives of environmental regulation. So in that second case, how we do our work, an example that I shared was my program at DEQ, the Materials Management Program, is trying to reduce the environmental impacts of building materials. There's a lot of different ways you could do that. Rather than going out and creating a new program, we looked around and we found some partners that had some different objectives. AARP, whoever thought that DEQ and AARP would be working together, AARP is looking at the housing stock that exists and says, you know what? It is not going to meet the needs of our population 20 years from now. We're going to have 80 million people who are going to want small single-level housing. And the home builders were looking at this. This conversation was happening in the depth of the Great Recession, and they were like, let us build anything. We just need work. And the city of Portland, of course, was looking at it through the broad lens of sustainability, all things sustainable. So the solution, waive system development charges on accessory dwelling units. those laneway cottages or mother-in-law apartments or converting your garage to an apartment or something, which achieves the objectives of all of our organizations, reduces the environmental impacts of materials, provides small single-level housing for elderly people, compact, dense urban form, creates jobs in the construction sector, and it was really inspired by this diagram here, which is a diagram of taking advantage of the wind. In the literal sense, that means, siting your house, your building so the windows open in the right direction and that your crops grow on the right side of the hill. But this was more in a metaphorical sense of finding people who were taking advantage of that wind that's blowing, objectives that other people want to accomplish, and seeing if you can find allies in unlikely places.
Fantastic. So two really big things there, kind of seeing how there's an opportunity to reframe your very objectives of what you're doing as an organization. And then also what our hope is that some of these ideas like the sectors can kind of inspire your thinking and help you recognize different opportunities. So thank you for spending that first session or first small group session exploring these ideas. We'll give you a little bit more time to continue that conversation in your small groups. But first, we'd like to hear from our panelists who, again, have varying degrees of experience with permaculture. We're going to start off with Karen Wolfgang of Independence Gardens. And Karen is a little more experienced. She does have her PDC, or her Permaculture Design Certification. So here you go, Karen.
All right, so Dave is going to do my slides for me. I'll avoid saying things like, next slide, please. But welcome again today to this presentation. Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking all of the things that I was going to say away from me. This is really great. It means that I get to take my little bit of this time here to go to a different level with some of these concepts. So my business, Independence Gardens, is 5 years old. And I have currently 6 employees. We started to help people grow their own food, to do one really small, achievable thing in this big mess that we're facing, right? We decided after 5 years of doing that our mission was actually deeper and broader. And so our new statement is, we help people create better relationships with their natural and built environments. So we've expanded from that initial kind of very passionate, idealistic place. We're doing some more conventional home and landscape construction now. And I would say it's probably all inspired by permaculture in various ways. I got my PDC in 2009, just around the time that we were starting the business. And I'm lucky enough to be able to apply the concrete lessons of permaculture in my business, as well as some of those more metaphorical or more abstract pieces as well. So that's a harvest basket. Everybody celebrate getting a harvest, right? Get a yield. Yeah. All right. So this is just I wanted to talk just a little bit about zones, sectors, and guilds in my business. This image is of a balcony garden at a condo in Northwest Portland. So you can see herbs there on the balcony railing in a self-watering planter system. This is an illustration, a very concrete, again, illustration of keeping those things that need our attention the most closer to where we spend our time, right? We keep, in my business, again, on the more metaphorical or large-scale application side of things, we keep our organizational structure essentially as zones. So I'm still in zone 1. I'm still kind of at the center of everything because I've been doing this the longest, but I've got project managers now that I'm interfacing most with. And the number of times that I actually have to answer my sort of support staff's questions are diminishing over time because I'm interacting with the people that need the most input from me and vice versa most often. And then it kind of ripples out from there. So zones are really important. Sectors, those things, those pesky things that you can't get rid of, you can't control. So sectors are, in the concrete world, wind and water and animal movement. And in this case, this garden was built in a community garden plot on Southeast 20th here in Portland. They were having the pilfering sector show up, right? They were having some folks taking veggies when the plot tender didn't want that to happen. So she asked us to put up a little fence, and we did. This next one, so gilding, not only between organizations, but also within a single organization. All of the functions that each of us perform can be very much symbiotic and mutually beneficial. So that's enough. I mean, Dave already mentioned the Three Sisters in agriculture, and that's just the kind of the touchstone, the really simple example that doesn't work here in Oregon. Don't try it in your garden, unless you're really careful with it, but it definitely works as a metaphor. How can we address each of our unique strengths and put them together in magical ways sometimes? So okay, that last slide is my dog. That's Ray. And I wanted to, since I have a moment here to do so, talk about the bigger lessons of permaculture for me in my business. I do consider the helping people grow their own food as well as helping people create better relationships. I consider that building community resilience. And permaculture is all about abundance, right? Not just sustainability, not just steady state, but how can we make more and better and keep it positive? And so permaculture informs the transition movement, which I like to use as a touch point as well. So social permaculture into the transition movement recognizes the twin challenges of climate change and peak oil, or peak everything, and gives us an opportunity to use solutions like our businesses and any other activities that we might be involved in to create positive futures, to create that abundance. And so my question that I'm going to leave with is, what does a truly permanent culture look like here? How do our businesses and our endeavors serve as catalysts for maybe indigeneity, getting back to that origin of permanent cultures that have been here the longest? What would it look like to do business here as if we're going to be here forever?
Thank you, Karen. And so next we'll hear from Kjell van Zoen, CEO and co-founder of Plywerk.
Thank you, Dave. I just learned a new word, indigeneity. That's amazing. I don't have any fancy words like that in my presentation. My name is Kjell van Zoen. I run a small business called Plywerk. We manufacture and produce and design eco-conscious photo frames and solutions like this. Two concepts that are central to my business, Dave, are lean and green. So lean, as we see it, is to reduce waste and maximize value-added work through a combination of process management and continuous improvement. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but how does this really tie into permaculture? Well, there's two things in permaculture that really, two principles that tie in very nicely. One is creatively use and respond to change, and the other is to produce no waste. So the first one is really kind of the same as process management and continuous improvement. Process management is really where it means having checklists for everything that you do. Every single process that you have in your business or organization, you have a checklist for. And continuous improvement is just constantly tweaking those checklists to make sure that they're up to date and making sure that you're getting the most value out of your work. Produce no waste. So reducing waste, they have 7 types of waste that they talk about in lean manufacturing. They're listed right there. And maximizing value-added work means maximizing the work you do that the customer is willing to pay for, which also includes yourself. You're also a customer of your own business in a sense. You want to make sure that the work you do, you're not wasting your time. So for instance, we used to drive all of our product 3.5 miles from our wood shop to Northeast Portland and back again sometimes. That's a total waste of transportation. It's also kind of talks about, it goes back into like the bad zoning idea of permaculture. Next slide. So how are we green? Or we say more than just green. So we're committed to a triple bottom line philosophy, as you can see here. I started working with Dave as implementing all this in 2010, and we used the 4 systems conditions of the natural step framework to assess everything we do in our business. And we've had a handful of successes since this time, since starting. Next slide. This is our biggest one. So we replaced all of our bubble wrap with this thing called Guyami Green Wrap, which is kind of like an expander of craft paper, recycled craft paper, and then you wrap it around. And we estimated that since 2011, we've approximately saved 40,000 square feet of bubble wrap from entering the ecosystem. So that was a big win for us. But it always felt with our eco-conscious efforts that there was something, I don't know, I felt like I was clutching at straws, that there must be a better all-encompassing system than all the ones that were being presented to me. So last year I attended a permaculture workshop, and this was displayed on the projector as I walked in, this picture here. And immediately I realized that my assumption about permaculture being to do with agriculture was entirely wrong. And it really got me interested in permaculture in a very big way. So the next time Dave and I, we can wait on that one. The next time Dave and I met, we spent hours looking at each principle and how it fits into Plywerk in our business. And for many of them, we were already doing good things. Lean and green kind of fits in nicely. But for others, I was finding I was taking a lot of poetic license in defining the principles and how they work with Plywerk, and it just didn't feel right. So it didn't take too long for me to realize that the current economic paradigm that we kind of operate in right now would have to shift dramatically for Plywerk to really fit in and be part of a system that's based on the principles of permaculture. So I want to clarify here. The current economic system that the world kind of operates in will not allow for permaculture to work. So the UN is working on this issue. This is actually from a UN agenda here. But this is way beyond this workshop here. But really what it did to me is that it pushed me to really push our eco-conscious efforts at Plywerk much faster than I had wanted to do before. For me, it was kind of like a realization, well, if it's not enough, I should do everything I possibly could do. You know, I want to eliminate all the possibilities. And to me, it's kind of like someone telling me to push a big red button that shouldn't be pushed, you know. So I decided to launch a new product. Next slide. It's called Stanley. Stanley is locally sourced, sustainably harvested and upcycled Western walnut. Before we did everything with bamboo mostly, which is imported from China. We have a symbiotic relationship with the Joinery. So I work with Jon here to upcycle their Western walnut, and then we turn it into product, but we also sell the product back to them. So next slide. It has eco-friendly packaging. We minimize the packaging. It's very small, 10.5 by 5 inches. It's recyclable. It's versatile, allows for the product to be used. So you can put a picture in there as well as it just being on display. So quite often shopkeepers will just like throw the packaging away, which is very wasteful. It's printed in Portland, 100% post-consumer fiber paper, free of chlorine chemistry. Next slide. And it has an all-natural finish. It has a European certified child-safe, all-natural renewable oil wax blend, which means you can chew on it. So, next slide. I invite you all to push the big red button and join me in this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's been a pleasure working with Kjell over the years and seeing kind of his evolution and thinking. And I was excited when he was like interested in permaculture. I was like, I hadn't been telling you about that because I thought that it would turn you off, but apparently it turned him on. So our next speaker is Jon Blumenauer of the Joinery, and also Jon is like totally new to permaculture, really as a part of this panel session. So Jon, thank you.
Thanks. So there are a lot of experts on permaculture here today. I'm not one of them. I do have a background in sustainable business practices and strategy, but the permaculture framework is very new to me. And to be perfectly transparent, I actually have a lot of trouble kind of grasping the framework and how it works. But upon more scrutiny and research as a part of this panel, I realized that there's a lot of what we do at the Joinery that really overlaps well with permaculture. So I want to start just by talking a little bit about people care. And for permaculture, that relates to taking care of people's material and physical needs. So providing, as a business, providing good jobs that pay good salaries and provide solid benefits and that sort of thing. For me, I think that's pretty straightforward. What's much more interesting and powerful is providing for people's emotional needs and well-being. I think this really is a way to foster engagement and creativity. For us, that starts in the design process of our furniture. It involves the customer, it involves our salesperson, it involves the design, our furniture designer, and a builder. And so the process is a little bit more involved and time-consuming at the beginning, but it does foster that engagement, that creativity, and we know that that piece is going to be exactly right when we're through. After design is complete, we turn it over to the builder to build. And I say builder to build. Our model works with one builder being responsible for a piece of furniture all the way from lumber selection, which you see in one of these photos here, through final assembly of the product. And so we don't have an assembly line type manufacturing facility here. It's a very different model for producing products. We have a really well-appointed wood shop that has very modern equipment that allows us to operate really efficiently. But much of what we do still relies on time-honored woodworking techniques, handcrafted woodworking techniques that not only yield a fantastic product at the end, but also require a great amount of skill and experience. That handcrafted quality goes all the way through to finishing, where it's a hand finishing process that involves sanding and oiling. Again, very labor-intensive process, but again, it yields a really fantastic product. And at the very end, I hope you can see this, the product gets a plaque and gets signed by the builder who builds it. And this process just is a fantastic way to generate pride and ownership in every single product that comes through our shop. And that helps to develop a sense of place and purpose, certainly for our builders and also for our larger organization. But it also helps develop that sense of place and purpose for our customers, many of whom ask for their photos to be taken, not just with their piece, but with their builder when it's through. The sense of place and purpose also expands to the greater community. So I was up on our roof. This is our Woodstock manufacturing facility. I was up there a couple weeks ago, and I was taking some photos originally to talk about how what we do fits into the Earth Care model and some of the principles around environment. And so you can see we have solar panels on our roof that generate a significant portion of our energy. And this tower-like structure on the left is a briquetter that turns all of our sawdust into briquettes that we donate to the community. We also have a scrap bin out front where any piece of wood that we can't use, we donate to the community. But as I was doing this, completely unscripted, a guy pulled up on his bike and with a backpack loaded up some scrap wood and briquettes. And I thought, what a unique statement that is about how we create a sense of place and purpose for those in the broader community for what we do around environment. That kind of cascades into this people care piece as well. We also create a sense of place and purpose for our furniture. Every residential piece of furniture is guaranteed for a lifetime. So we very intentionally design and construct furniture that's not just going to be around for decades, but we hope generations. And that means we have to create a really high quality product that's durable and lasting and functional, but it also incorporates design and being very intentional about design. We don't design iPhones where if you pull one out, you look at it and say, oh my gosh, that is so 2013. We design product that is going to be design-wise relevant for the next 50 years. And our hope is that we create product that has a longer lifespan than the tree it was built from. And I think that kind of altogether, there's a lot of overlap between what we do and the principles of permaculture. Thanks.
Thank you, Jon. And last but not least, we'll hear from Sarah Curtis-Fawley of Pacific Pie Company, who also a little more experienced and has her PDC.
Thanks. So I'm Sarah from Pacific Pie. Pacific Pie has been in business for almost 6 years now, which kind of blows my mind because the time has flown. Before I owned a pie shop, I was a psychologist. I was living in Australia with my husband, Chris, who is Australian. And we became kind of obsessed backyard gardeners and decided to kind of take that to the next level. So in 2006, we spent about a month and a half on an eco-village in Queensland, Australia, and got our permaculture design certificate. And at the time, we were young, we were dreamers, and we thought, we're going to become farmers. And we quickly realized that that's not an easy career path to follow. But we were really interested in what we were learning from permaculture. We ended up traveling around Asia for a while, doing some woofing, which is willing workers on organic farms. And so we woofed our way around Asia. And there's actually a big permaculture movement in Southeast Asia as well. So we were able to kind of put what we learned to use there. I won't go into why Pacific Pie kind of came about, because that's a story for another day, but moved to Portland in 2009 and started Pacific Pie. We make handmade sweet and savory pies. We have 2 restaurants, one in Southeast Portland and one in Northwest Portland. And definitely when we started Pacific Pie, from the very beginning, we incorporated a lot of what we learned in permaculture to our business. So the first thing is zone planning, which we've talked a lot about today. So in designing the physical spaces of our bakeries, our restaurants, where the customers interact with our products, where our staff move about our facilities on a daily basis, we think a lot about the zones and how to make things efficient and comfortable and just make sense on a day-to-day basis. You know, a lot of places don't put a lot of thought into this, especially in restaurant kitchens. We have a lot of people who come work for us in our bakeries and our kitchens, and they're really pleased with how well-functioning everything is, and even thinking about things like ergonomics for our staff, and we think of that as part of zone planning. Another thing that permaculture has taught me that I apply to business all the time is to do only what is necessary. In permaculture, when thinking about the natural world, this is about having a stance of humility towards the natural world and not taking things away or adding things to the earth that are going to harm it. In a business, I think sometimes we have a tendency to overcomplicate things in business, to think that we have to buy really expensive pieces of equipment or keep growing. And Chris and I talk a lot about this idea of doing only what is necessary, and so taking a step back and thinking about, with each step in our business, do we really need to do this, and how is this going to hurt or harm the business and our employees? Often, as in nature, the simplest answer is the most elegant one. Another principle we use all the time is to multiply functions. So in a small business, and I now have 50 employees, so you know, we're a growing business, but we're definitely still a small business. We have to conserve our financial resources, and we have to think about, with everything we put into our business, whether it's buying a new piece of equipment or an ingredient that we're going to have to make our different products, how does it work in different aspects of the business? So, for example, if I'm designing a new menu item, I still design everything that's on all of our restaurant menus. I'm not going to bring an ingredient into my restaurant if it only goes into one item on the menu, because that would lead to more waste. So we think about, how can that ingredient be used in different restaurant items, for example. One of the biggest aha moments I had when I took my permaculture design course was this idea of improving the soil. So soil is the beginning of everything in life, basically. And in permaculture, there's a lot of time and effort put into, whether you have a backyard garden or a larger farm, improving the soil by adding organic matter, by increasing the biodiversity of that soil with earthworms and other critters that live in the soil. And in business, I think of our soil as our employee group. And as our employee group has grown, I spend a lot of time and effort thinking about how I can continuously improve the soil of our business, being our employees, because everything starts with this group. So as we've grown from just Chris and I to 10 employees to 50 employees, it's been about, how can I tap into all of those individuals' talents and interests to continuously improve our business. I've got my red card, so I'm going to speed ahead. In permaculture, we talk a lot about diversity and selection of species. So you wouldn't just grow a monoculture of corn in a permaculture system. You grow lots of different things, so that if one thing fails, you can rely on another crop. Likewise, in business, we've thought a lot about the diversity of our product offerings and our income streams. So we don't just rely on our restaurants. We also have a small wholesale division where we make products for other restaurants and grocery stores. We teach classes. And we also do a lot of catering. And that's really helped smooth out the bumps of the restaurant business, which can be very up and down. I'm going to skip over that right now and go to, this was, my permaculture teacher felt that this was the most important permaculture principle, which is that the gift must travel. So in nature, we are constantly accepting the gifts of nature. We breathe in oxygen and we give it back as CO2 for plants. We accept sunshine in the form of the food that we eat. And so in business, we think about this a lot in terms of what we can give back as a business to the community. So I do a lot of classes. This is me teaching a class for young people who are at risk of dropping out of high school, but possibly interested in going into the culinary industry. We, twice a month, have a community benefit day at our restaurant where we donate 10% of our proceeds to a nonprofit. We also donate a lot of food to Sisters of the Road and Urban Gleaners. So we've been very grateful for what Portland has done for us in supporting our business, and we feel it's very important to give back. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so now that you've had a chance to hear from some different business leaders in some different business models with different degrees of experience and familiarity with permaculture, share how it's influenced them, I want to give you some more time back in your small groups to explore these materials, any of the ideas that you heard from the panel, and so continue that conversation about ways that you can apply these concepts and tools to your organization. But then also in this time, we want to encourage you to acknowledge any difficulties and note questions that you might have. So then, again, warning, I'd like to hear from a few of you, so designate a person to give a brief report back. And we'll circulate once again, and when we come back, hearing from you and your questions will transition into our Q&A time together. All right, so we'll give you about 10 minutes once again. Brief highlights, and in particular, some of the questions that were raised and difficulties that you might have encountered in how these ideas might be relevant and apply to you and your organization. So here's the table. Do we have somebody who would be willing to offer a highlight? Thank you.
Well, we were talking about the remodel that we did in our office a couple of years ago. And of course, I have a permaculture certification, but my colleague here is really the one that was doing the design. And when they started it, they just knew that they had to be sustainable about it because, you know, we're a sustainable business and we're a B Corp. And if we did anything that wasn't sustainable, our employees would completely freak out and management would hear about it. So one of the things that I was saying to the group is that I didn't really make the connection between what we were doing in our business, because I think of permaculture, you know, as in terms of agriculture and not really in terms of our business. And so when they were doing the design, they were really doing it based on observations of what our employees needed and what actually functioned better. And then, of course, they ended up applying principles, you know, aside from observation. Like one of the things that we did is that we moved the door on our break room to a different wall so that it was actually more accessible and that you didn't have to go nearly as far to go back and forth from the conference room or from your office or whatever. And that we also, in the process of being more sustainable, we went paperless. And so we had this gigantic file room that we weren't using. So they decided to cut that out, make it into a tiny little file room, and then add more workspaces. And then they redesigned the workspaces to bring in more natural light so that, you know, that helped with the temperature, and then it also helped with the moods of the employees so that we could actually see more natural light instead of relying on the overhead lights throughout the day. And then they also redesigned our break room so that we had all of these different waste bins, like our compost, our, you know, curbside recycling, our special recycling, our cardboard recycling, all of these different things. It's actually a pretty complicated system to go into our break room and try and get rid of something. So then that also reduced our waste, and it actually got people thinking more about these concepts. But the thing that I didn't really put together until today is, to us, it just seemed like common sense, but it actually is a lot of permaculture. So congratulations to my colleague who actually is permaculture certified and doesn't even realize it. So.
Thank you. And the fact is that in a lot of ways, permaculture is common sense. So yeah, great. So love to hear from a couple more tables and highlights. You You can see where I'm drifting here because we haven't heard from this side of the room. I know you guys had some good things to say, so please give a quick highlight and any questions again that were raised.
One of the things that we were talking about, which kind of spurred from the lovely Pacific Pie presentation, was the use and value of diversity. And I personally actually work for Chinook Book, and it's we have diverse revenue streams as far as how we earn our money, but our product line is very limited. We have a print book and we have a smartphone app, and that's about it. And so we were kind of just talking about a way that I think that we could improve is just trying to think about how our product is going to evolve in the future, and it's going to change, and the print's going to phase out, and people are going to be using smartphones more. And I just think that that's something that I can bring back to them after being a part of this session. I also think that, gosh, what was the other thing we were talking about? Oh, the employees and the soil, and also we kind of adapted that to the zones as far as being very efficient in, who's working on what, and feel that we're all pretty independent, but we all kind of know what the mission of the company is and what needs to get done, and we can fill in for one another. Actually, that kind of is more of a guilt, but I don't really have any questions. Did you have any questions? But that's, yeah, really the diversity really struck me. So.
Great, thank you. And without having to pick on anybody, is there another table that's interested in sharing a highlight from your conversation in the second session? All right, great.
Hi, I was really struck by this concept of having a designated builder that the Joinery was talking about, and taking that to a higher abstract level of not just a piece of furniture, but designing it like a business policy or something to be implemented within an organization. And that no matter how well designed something is at the beginning with lots of stakeholder engagement, if it doesn't have someone who takes ownership of it and is willing to see it through from beginning to end, and is passed off from different working groups to get realized, its mission and its design will get diluted and distorted because it's just different people each time. And so just extrapolating that master builder into like someone actually making change within a company and keeping that mission true the entire way through. It's cool.
Great, thank you. So we have some time for questions, and I think that questions can fall into a couple broad categories. One, we're interested in hearing these questions about difficulties, challenges that you're confronting about applying permaculture to organizational models, and then other questions that you might just have for any of the panelists in general. So are there any questions out there? Yeah, great.
So I'll just open-ended question to it. Trying to understand the use small, slow solutions, local resources and responses managed to scale, how that might apply to a business.
Does anyone want to take that on? Yeah. Karen?
So small and slow solutions. Something that I need to say in general is that permaculture is not about the specifics of the solutions, the interventions, the techniques. It's about stepping back, and even if it's after the design process is already concluded, if you observed, if you connected, if you actually kind of knew what factors were at play before you went into a design process, what you ended up with was probably a permaculture solution. So small and slow, not trying to bite off more than you can chew. I'm not probably the best example of that principle in my business. I do tend to overcomplicate things. But introducing a new product line, for example, if you were to start with a limited run, instead of try to take over the market. You'll have less risk of failure, I guess, of catastrophic business ending failure if you keep it small and simple, right? So permaculture, you might see kind of images out there of folks running around building with cob and pooping and composting toilets, right? Awesome, awesome. Those things are great. They inspire me as a gardener and a business owner and a person. But it's, any of those solutions are not the right fit for every circumstance. And so what your task is, what all of our tasks are as permaculture practitioners, is translating these big abstract ideas into design solutions that really fit our circumstances and that try something small before it's proven, prove it, and then take it to the scale that it's meant to be at.
Any other questions out there? All the way in the back.
I'm just curious if there are any examples of larger companies that have adopted this principle. We had a good discussion here, but with two people who are at companies that have 500 employees and have been around for a while. And how easy is it to adopt this at a larger scale and to retrofit companies that already are in existence?
Well, briefly, I think it is easier to start from the ground up as opposed to retrofitting, as almost always the case. But anybody on the panel interested in speaking to that?
I think that's a really good question. I don't think any of us really have a good answer for that. And I think the reason is because permaculture hasn't been applied to business in the sense that we're kind of presenting here. What we're presenting is not revolutionary, but it's definitely something that we put it this way. David and I were very surprised that our concept for this workshop was even accepted. Because normally when you talk about permaculture and business, people's eyes glaze over and they're not interested. So I think today we've proved that there is a lot of overlap and there is a lot of opportunity and possibility there, which is great. But I'd be very interested in knowing the answer to your question myself.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that there is a lot of unknowns here. As we said, like there's an ongoing conversation about how permaculture applies in social realms and in the business world and in organizations broadly. And the challenges obviously would be greater if you have an entity that's at one stage in its history and development under certain philosophies and certain models and try to change it. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think any organization has an opportunity to take some of these ideas and explore them and begin to implement them and integrate them into their organizational model in some way. So I want to just share really quickly in closing, again, thank you for being a part of this conversation and exploring this with us. We weren't sure exactly what to expect with it. I'm really encouraged by a lot of things that we heard from the small groups. And I want to share one thought, and that is permaculture isn't just about agriculture. But from my time with it, it definitely calls upon us to participate with living systems. Like we really need to, if we want to be a business that contributes to permanent culture, we need to participate with living systems. And so it's, I think, important to keep in mind the framework of we're looking for how business can be a part of a permanent culture or a sustainable culture or more resilient, more vibrant cultures, as opposed to looking for frameworks and models that fit neatly and comfortably within business models. So we want to reframe that and think about how do we contribute and how do our organizations help create and maintain, again, thriving, regenerative cultures. And so we did just scratch the surface today. I hope you have some extra questions that continue to kick around in your mind. Our contact information is here, so if you have any other questions for us, we invite you to contact us. And then also we've listed a few extra resources, including the 2 books that were mentioned at the beginning, and then a couple other online sites and sources that you can continue your exploration and thinking about how permaculture might help inform you and your work and how you might be able to deepen your sustainability practices. So thank you very much and enjoy lunch.